did bring everybody in here, and I'm glad we had a few more than it might have been comfortable in the fellowship hall. And I've got pictures for us for two reasons. People like to look at pictures, and it also helps keep me on track, and maybe I won't ramble as much. Let's start with prayer, all right? Father, thank you for our time together tonight. We do understand how blessed we are to live in a part of the country that, for the most part, we have peace, security. We go to sleep at night with very little concerns in those areas. But, Father, there are other parts of the world that we know are certainly not that way. And what's taking place in Israel tonight, Father, is devastating for so many families. And the potential of the conflict growing is certainly there. And Father, we just ask that you guide those that make decisions, that work for peace, and help bring that about as best as possible. Through Jesus we pray. Amen. All right, I'm going to start two or three things. I am absolutely not an expert on this part of the world at all. No claim to be. So nothing I say is professing that in any way, all right? Never been over there, and probably will never go. It's a long airplane ride, and y'all know I hate airplanes, all right? So that first. Second part, I'll say this, and I just want to get this right out front. If somebody came thinking or expecting you're going to hear some end-time prophecy tonight, you're not. I do not believe that there is any prophecy through the Old Testament or Revelation that is waiting to be fulfilled. I don't think that's what's taking place in Israel or the Gaza Strip or any of that with Hamas is, signaling the end times. If most of you grew up in churches of Christ and you were pretty sheltered from the other prophecies and teachings of those that a lot of people in the world pay attention to or believe in. A lot of people in the world are looking for the 7 years of tribulation, 1,000-year reign, or whatever those things are that they believe. I think that is not my persuasion. Now, I will say this, though, all right, that just because that's not my persuasion, I don't believe that, it doesn't mean I don't pay attention to what other people say and think and value it and think that it is, to me, I'll say it this way. There are a lot of people that right now are watching what's taking place that are spiritual people that do believe the things there have maybe fitting into prophecy that's out there and waiting to be fulfilled, okay? All right? And there's a lot of people that are a whole lot smarter about things than I am that believe that, all right? And I only mention that to say in this respect then, we should be aware that what's taking place is not like what's taking place in Russia and Ukraine, in that what's taking place in Israel and Palestine and in that area has a lot more people paying attention to it and assigning reasons for it or beliefs about it than conflicts in other parts of the world. Does that make sense to you? All right. And this also, anytime you got a question, you want to make a comment, this is our discussion. This is not Ray Palmer just lecturing, okay? So I do think because of where it is and that belief by a lot of people, it means it's something we should pay attention to, all right? And so that's just a couple things I want to say. I told Christy and I told y'all Sunday, it was just something on my mind that I thought we should talk a little bit about it, all right? Because, this is going to be basically a historical discussion, all right? And some of this that we're talking about you'll be very familiar with, some maybe not, and some of you will probably know a whole lot more about some of the things we're going to talk about as we talk about it. But we're going to go back from the beginning, and we're going to try to understand why this part of the world is so difficult for anybody to bring peace to. And if you're somebody that's been removed from paying attention to that part of the world, You need to understand for years, for generations, and certainly for the last 100 years especially, there have been tremendous efforts to try to get Jewish people and basically Arab people, Muslims, most of them Islamic people, all right, to try to get in this small section of the world to get them to live peaceably with each other and respect that a certain piece of property over here belongs to one group and another piece of property belongs to another. And guess what? Y'all see the results of that. There has been basically zero. There's been few years along the way where they'll get along for a little bit, but really they don't get along. And nobody has been able to find a path to peace in that area. Don't know that anybody ever will. So there is a tremendous conflict. All right, a couple of things we need to keep in mind. If you were a Jew, so most of what now I got one more tangent, all right? I am not I don't favor the Jews over the Arabs, over Germans, over anybody else, all right? Y'all get that? Everybody in here? But some of you as we talk, it'll come across some of the discussion like you're a Jewish sympathizer, all right? And now, I love Jewish people, no different than I love anybody else, all right? I don't hate the Jews, but yeah, I hope you get what I'm saying. I just want us to try to understand why they feel the way they do, so many people that are Jewish people. It's hard for us to see it. Maybe just in talking about it, it'll help. All right? The Jewish people are very much Torah people. When I say Torah, what's the Torah? First five, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, right? They are very much Torah people, all right? And in the Torah, it says, remember the days of old, consider the years of all generations, ask your father, and he will inform you, your elders, and they will tell you. So the teaching there is, and if you expand it, is you should know your history. And the Jewish people know their history much better than we know our history. And our history is only like 250 years old. Their history is over 2,000 years old, and they know their history. They study their history. They're very familiar with it, and it becomes important to them. But again, it's part of their teaching from the Torah. So we know the story of where the Jewish people started. It was with Abraham. He was first called. Yeah, have you ever wondered why God didn't use Noah and he used Abraham? Don't know that the Bible doesn't tell us, but and Jewish people would tell you the reason that Abraham was the first one that was called was because Abraham believed in his heart of hearts that people could change. Noah, they would tell you, did not believe that. They would tell you Noah believed in God, but he didn't really believe in humans. He didn't believe in the ability of humans to go from being unfaithful to having faith in God. And they would tell you Abraham did. Don't know if that's true or not, but it is pretty interesting. You look at Noah, it's almost like, so you were around for 100 years building the ark or whatever, and you didn't get anybody to get in on the ark with you, But Abraham was continually, interested in other people. Anyway, we know the story. So Abraham was called, and Abraham and his wife, Sarah, who had 2 sons, had some others, but Isaac and Ishmael that we're familiar with. So you had Isaac. We're going to talk together. Had Isaac and his wife was? Huh? Y'all don't know who Isaac's wife was? Okay, you said it all right. Sorry about that. All right, Isaac and Rebekah, and they had a boy named, they had a couple, but Jacob and Esau, and Jacob's wife was Rachel and Leah, a couple others. They had their boys, 12. And why this is important, so again, most of us are very familiar with this, but they had their children, 12, and their sons and all their folks, which eventually became the 12 tribes of Israel. Where did the name Israel come from? God gave it to Jacob. All right, changed his name, and so Israel. And we're going to see the significance of some of that as we move through this. So we get the basic part. Now there's Joseph, and there's a famine in the land. They end up down in Egypt. How long are they in Egypt? Yeah, a bunch of years. Also interesting, if you were to look at how we count time and how the Jewish people count time, it's different, all right? Like like in the Jewish calendar or years, we would be in the year, I'm not like 5,898, whatever it is, and don't quote that exactly, but they keep time different than we keep time. But in this period of time, we're really talking somewhere around 1,500. 1700, BC, before Christ is that's not what it means, but that period of history. All right. Now, God had made a covenant to Abraham, right? And we know it as they'll receive a promised land, and through his descendants, the nations of the earth would be blessed. All right. I want us to start right here and understand we're talking history tonight, and it's hard for us. It's really hard for us, but we're talking history and not Bible history. All right? We tend to think of Bible history as like, oh, those people, they're in the Bible. Well, and it's not that way. It's people that lived in the world, and God actually told us stories about them assembled in the Bible. You get it? But these are human beings living life just as other people are living life. And so this is a group of people who have a heritage in Abraham and what God told Abraham, and it's in the Torah, it's in our Bible, but it's in their Torah, of which they teach it to all their generations. And here's what it says: I will establish my covenant between me and you and your descendants after you throughout their generations how long is this covenant? Everlasting covenant to God, to you, and to your descendants after you. Now, again, there's a lot of teaching here and a lot of things that take place that we're not going to get into. I'm telling you, though, when they read this covenant and they read the Torah, they read this promise. The promise that was made to Abraham to them is an everlasting promise. Whether you agree with that or not, it doesn't matter. That's what they believe. So the land that they believe God gave to the children of Israel, to those generations of people through Abraham, they believe that was a land given to them for everlasting. All right? No country, no sovereignty in the world ever has higher authority of that land than God. So you get that. So they always believe that's their land, right? Now, I said we're going to look at quite a few pictures. This is sort of what the world was like at the time of Moses, and where we're talking about, they've gone into Egyptian bondage over here. This is sort of what is the settled part of the world and the fertile part of the world where most of the living takes place. Here is Canaan. This is where they are. We're going to talk in a few minutes about Assyria. That's a very dominant place. Babylonia, that's very dominant. And over here is Egypt, and the Nile is a big part of them. But that's sort of the part of the world where all this is happening. And the children of Israel have gone down into Egypt. There they are there for, like we said, 400 years, and they grow from about 70 people to a couple, who knows exactly, but they, 2 to 3 million. I mean, they really grow in size. And we know the story. God calls Moses. He goes in, and then through some very miraculous events, children of Israel leave. And they head off into the promised land. We're going to talk a good bit about a couple of things I'm going to share with you right now over the next couple of weeks. But they come into Mount Sinai, and Moses goes up on the mount, and what does God give him? Huh? He gives him the law. Now, we have been so conditioned to believe he gave him the 10 Commandments on 2 tablets, and like on one side it had, 4 or 6 or whatever, and the other it had, right? It's not. He gave Moses the law. Do you know where the 10 Commandments came from? We made it up. There's never been 10 Commandments. I think it's 631, don't remember the exact number, but there's a bunch of laws, and none of the laws had any more significant than any other of the laws. They were all the laws that were given. It was convenient, though, for us, as we put the Bible together, to pick out some of the first ones, sort of like we do the Beatitudes or whatever. And the only reason I bring that up is, like, in our minds, we think of the 10 Commandments as being, that's it, the law. But the law, again, in the Torah is all the commands, and we'll talk a little bit more in a few minutes. They also, the Jews, believed not just that God gave those written laws, but he also gave verbal laws that were passed down from generation to generation to generation, that eventually, in around 200, 300, 400 AD, during that period of time, they were written into what's called the Mishnah, which is when they eventually wrote down the oral laws. But that's, again, from the Jewish belief, there's what God gave to them as the laws that were written that Moses brought down, and then there were other laws that communicated, and it would really, the oral laws were explanations in their minds of that, right? Sort of why that's important. Matthew 22, 37 and 38, I have used this verse before, and you've heard it before. And he said to him, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart. This is Jesus talking. And with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the great and foremost commandment. The second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. Upon these 2 commandments hang the whole law and the prophets. Only when I've done some additional reading and some studying and learning from some things, the old law, that's, I have taken that and said, yeah, that's the new covenant, is love God and love each other. Have you ever heard me say that? Y'all have heard me say that, all right? Guess what, folks? That's the old covenant. In fact, Jesus said that's the old covenant. That's exactly what he said there. He said, on these 2 commandments, all the law and the prophets, he said, all that old law hangs on this. Do you love God and do you love each other? Why that's important is what God had communicated to Israel and what the Jewish people believe and what we should believe, because God communicated it to them, and that was his intent from the beginning, which continues to be his intent today, is if you could put all of God's expectations, if you want to call it that, for mankind ever into 2 words, it would be nice. Really, that's what God is always, be nice. It's what he told in all the commandments, what he gave to them is be nice. I don't want one person having a whole lot more than the other. Don't take advantage of each other that way. Be nice. That's what it's all about. And you'll see when people struggle is when, guess what? When they're not nice. When civilizations are not any longer nice to each other, they seem to have problems. All right, so the whole law, what God gave Moses, there we are. All right, we're going to move on. So, after they leave Egypt, then in the Jewish history, and we read this again in the Bible, they go through a period of history that's called the conquering. All right, this is when they go out and they're taking on the world. It's really interesting this period of time when they're taking on the world, because they are inferior. At the time that this is taking place, all right, those of you that know world history, you remember the Bronze Age? You remember that? What came before the Bronze Age? What came before the Bronze Age? Trick wood. All right. So in the Bronze Age, what was something? Let me go to this. All right. This is taking place in what's called the Bronze Age, this period of time when the conquest is taking place. And that's when people have learned to make tools. Like the Hittite people had learned to heat up ovens to like 800 degrees, and they could do all this stuff and make all these tools. That's when it's got the Bronze Age they're talking about, all right? So the Jewish people are going to do battle against all these folks, and the Jewish ability is very inferior to all those other people. But that's still their calling, and that's what they're doing. And they're going to do battle, and they're starting to take all the land. And when they're starting to do all that, then they go through the period where the 12 tribes are together, and you have judges ruling. You remember Othniel, Ehud, Shamgar, all the judges, and one of the last ones is Samuel. The people come to Samuel. They want a king. And God tells them, Samuel tells them, right, you don't want a king. King aren't going to be very good. King's going to build things you don't want built. They're going to tax you, and king's going to do all this stuff, going to make your people marry people you don't want to marry, and going to make your people go to war, all that stuff, right? And they said, what? We got that, but kings are cool. We want a king. So God said, okay, you can have a king. So he gave them a king. Saul was the first king. We three kings. I like this picture. We three kings. Saul was the first king. David was the second king. David was a cool king, right? He was a good king of the Jewish people. Did a lot of good things. Biggest thing, or one of the biggest things David did, and this starts coming into play, is in the year 1000 BC, doing battle with the Jebusites, they conquered, or they took Jerusalem, all right? Under David's reign, they took Jerusalem and began to use that and call that as their capital, all right? I said, no, we're going to get out of the Bible in a few minutes, but this is where this all starts, right? Is the land they were promised, and now as they're doing it, here's how it's going. They take a bunch of the land under David. They take Jerusalem, call it their capital, and then Solomon comes along, and what does Solomon do? This is around the year 986 BC or somewhere in the 980s. What does he do? He builds the temple, Solomon's temple. He builds the temple in Jerusalem. It's a great time for the Jewish people, all right? Because they're there. They got their temple. Things seem to be pretty good. And then what happens? They start having their own internal conflict, and they divide, and you have the northern kingdom, which is called, the 10 tribes to the north is called. This is real important, people. If you've gone to sleep, pay attention. 10 tribes in the north are called Israel. The 2 tribes in the south are called Judah. All right. What is the capital of Israel? Samaria. The capital of Judah is Jerusalem. All right. Still sort of the 12 tribes, but they split up. And then what happens around 740 or 50 in there is where the Assyrians come, and they take the northern kingdom. This, again, they take the northern kingdom, the 10 tribes to the north, they take into Assyria, and they assimilate them into Syria. And where are the 10 tribes of the Jewish people, the nation of Israel today? They're gone. Now, if you talk to a Jew, they don't know if they're coming back or not. They don't really have that figured out, but they're gone. All right? So the only 2 tribes that were left were in the south, and we know what happens to them. They go over into Babylonia, right? And the captivity for 70 years that Jeremiah prophesied about would come, and that takes place. They're into exile. They're over there for about 70 years. And all during this time, you still have that world where Assyria, Babylonia, and all that's going on. And then there's this little boy that goes to bed one night and has a dream. And when he wakes up the next morning, I'm making this part up. I don't know if that's how it happened or not. But like he tells his daddy about the dream, and he says, guess what, Daddy? I'm going to take the whole world. Say like, yeah, right. But guess what he did? He took the whole world. It's probably the most significant thing that's ever taken place in the world was when Alexander the Great. Let me go back to this before we get to Alexander the Great. I forgot to tell you this. So they're in Babylonia, and when the Babylonians came in and took Jerusalem and Israel, well, Judah, that would have been the southern tribe. But when they came into Jerusalem, what did they do? they destroyed the temple, right? Destroyed the temple. So children of Israel go into Babylonia. They're there for like 70 years. Then Cyrus, I meant to mention him first. Cyrus, you read about this in the Bible. This is the period of Nehemiah and Ezra and all that in the Bible. All right, Cyrus says, I'll support y'all. Y'all go back and you can go back into Jerusalem and we can build a temple back. And so they start building the temple. They build a temple again. Remember, it lay bare for, they worked on it for a while, then they didn't work on it for a while. That whole story, right? This period of history in the Jewish world, that other period we were talking about from like Saul, David, and Solomon down to the destruction of the temple with the Babylonians is called the First Temple era. Isn't that creative? That's when they had the first temple. This period of history in the Jewish world is called the what? The Second Temple period. All right, so because they go back in with Cyrus and they rebuild the temple and things are pretty good. They're getting along. They've let them build the temple. A lot of the Jews come back into Jerusalem and into that part of the world. All right. A lot of them stay in Babylonia, though. This is what they call diaspora, where you start having Jews dispersed. That's what I mean, dispersed all around the world. All right. And this is one of the first periods. Right. Now, we're going to talk about Alexander the Great before I get back to him. The children of Israel were what God called through Abraham, and then when he changed the name to Israel, they became Israelites. Once the northern tribe went into Assyria and the southern tribe went into Babylon, guess what? Israel's gone. Okay? So when we think of that today, that's why they will refer to themselves as the Jewish nation, or Jews, or sometimes you'll hear them referred to as the remnant of Israel, but Israel was no more. Okay? Now we're just talking about a Jewish group of people, race of people. All right, get that? And so, again, when they come back in from Babylonia into Jerusalem in that part of the world, there's some there, but they have begun this scattering around the world, these Jewish people. And that's why that's important with Alexander the Great. He takes over the world, so who does the land that God promised to the Jews belong to? At this time, Alexander the Great. The period that we just talked about, where you had, even when they were split, the northern and the southern kingdoms, until the last really 100 years, that land has been occupied and, quote, owned by all kinds of people, but the Jewish people have not had any autonomy in that land for that period of time. Y'all get that? I mean, that's a long period of time. Doesn't matter whether they had it or not. Who did they always, through all those generations and hundreds and thousands of years, believe that land belonged to? They always believed it was their land. It's just the world never allowed that or accommodated that during all that period of time. All right, so Alexander the Great comes in, as we know. He conquers the whole world and do what now? Why does it belonged to Alexander the Great? Because the way it worked back then was they go kill people until they are in submission. He became king of the hill. He went and fought. That's what he would go say. Greg was the king of this little part of the country, and Herschel was king of this little part of the country. He would take his people and go do battle with them till they finally said, "We're done." Or he killed Greg and he killed Herschel, whatever. But he conquered the known world with his armies, right? The problem with conquering the known world, we talked about this once, the problem with conquering the known world at such a young age, or being that kind of a fighter at such a young age, is you die fast, all right, because you wear yourself out. But he died young, and we'll look at that in a minute, but I want to go to this picture. We talked about this not too long ago. The significant thing with Alexander the Great was he introduced Hellenism into the world. It wasn't like he did it, but the spread of his kingdom and their culture throughout the entire world brought a Hellenistic view to the world. Alexander the Great's teacher, and when I say teacher, it's like he had one teacher that would come and sit with him every day and would teach him. And his teacher, some of you probably know, was Aristotle. Aristotle's teacher was Plato. Plato's teacher was Socrates. So you had these generations of this kind of thought all being poured into Alexander the Great and then dispersed through everybody. All right? So Hellenism, what's the big deal about Hellenism? And we are in some ways a very Hellenistic people. All right? Hellenism, I heard it described this way and I realized, so if you are a male and you're Hellenistic, when you get up in the morning, you go stand in front of the mirror and you're like, wow. I mean, now I wouldn't, but like they would. Like if you had all the ripples, I mean, it's all about your physical experience. And if you go look at much of the art of that day or the sculptures of that day, guess what? Most of them don't have any clothes on. So you see all these nude men. It's because of this Hellenist, it was very much about outward appearance. And then they're standing in front of the mirror looking at wow, and they're thinking, well, how did I think of this? Where did I come up with this wow? Well, I did all that in this, wow, that's mine. I'm able to think all this stuff. So they were all about what they could think, and they were all about what they could do. Now, the poor old Jew, when they get up in the morning, what do? The first thing they do is close themselves, and they're quiet because they want to hear. That's what, see, the Hellenistic, they just want to be out there, all right? The Jew wants to hear God. That's what they're taught. So why I said that is now you have not just people that are a different race, but you have two completely different approaches to this world and living in this world that are trying to cohabitat, and that is a struggle. All right. So now, after Alexander the Great dies, and we talked about that. He died at a young age. He had 3 generals, really, but he didn't have a successor to the throne, and so they end up, like typically do, they end up sort of splitting the kingdom up and doing a lot of fighting back and forth. Why that's important here is they had the Ptolemies. I don't know how to say that word if I said it right. And the Seleucids were up top. Right over here is where we're talking about, right over here. This is where Israel is, right? You had this group down here, and you had this group up here, and guess what they're doing? They're doing battle. Where do you think they're doing battle? They're doing battle right in this area, right in the middle of where these Jews, where the children of Israel are living. And it becomes real problematic. Several different skirmishes. I put this picture, we talked once before about Hanukkah. Hanukkah came from the Maccabean revolt. You remember it was so bad that some Jews were revolting against the Seleucids and the rule. I mean, they had taken and they were offering pigs on the altar in the temple. I mean, it was really ugly type things that were going on. And this band of Jews rose up, and so the significance here is, guess what? There's fighting, always fighting in this part of the country, and so much of it is because there's people that live there that believe it's theirs and believe the world should work one way, and they're continually being controlled by other people that live different and believe the world works a different way. All right, and when you have those two coming together, they tend to not get along. All right, so that was all problematic during that period of history. The Hasmonean kingdom was really that came out of that, and you can see where this area this shows a map of just how it grew. Some of the control did of this area that was, these people that were controlling this part of the world. We can't go into a lot of history here, but I want you to see, it got very ugly to the point they called in this guy because there's this country that's becoming powerful, and they got this guy named Mark Antony. How about you come down here and help us out? And he came in, Rome came in, and that's when Rome started ruling this part of the world. And the Roman Empire took over, and now Israel, which there's no Israel, but Judah is what they would be more favorably called. But this part of the world, Galilee, as we see it in the Bible referred to, this part of the world now is under Roman rule. And the Romans decide, there's a long story how this happened, they decide to put a king down there over this part of the world, and his name is Herod. And we know King Herod from our Bible study. King Herod was a wicked dude. He was wicked to the core. But one thing King Herod was good at was building stuff. And King Herod built a lot of things. And one of the things that he worked on was that second temple was not in great shape after a lot of years, and he did a lot to make it the premier sort of spiritual thing in all of the world at that time, the known world at that time. That's Herod. All right, and that brings us up to the period of time that we're very familiar with Jesus, right? But in all this discussion so far, do you see the Jews? All right, you sort of get what the Jews are? What? They're a people that were promised a land, right? They got kicked out of that land. They've come back somewhat to the land. Rome is letting them live there, right? Rome is letting the Jews live there as long as they behave, right? Don't cause any problems. Pay your taxes, do the things right. And the story that we know of Jesus, that was a skirmish that was taking place here in this part of the world, and they didn't like having to deal with that. It was a problem for them. But the Jews could stay there as long as they would behave. But they started being so oppressed and so persecuted that finally the Jews decided that they're going to revolt against Rome. They're going to rebel against Rome. I'm going to come back to that picture in just a minute. And there's a long thing that takes place for about 3 or 4 years with Nero, who dies, and Vespasian, who was the military leader, he becomes emperor, and then finally Titus ends up, and they go in and they wipe out Jerusalem, and they destroy the temple. Okay? All right? Now I'm telling you again, this from a Jewish side. All right? The Jews believe, again, they have been eternally promised to be God's people, and their land is everlastingly theirs. All right? And a Jew would tell you this, and they would be right, that you don't rebel, you don't revolt against Rome at that time. If you revolt against Rome, guess what? They might just kill a bunch of you off the first time. You think you're going to rebel and revolt against them. You do it twice, they'll just wipe you off the face of the earth. But guess what? The Jews revolted against Rome not once, not twice, but 3 times. This is the Wailing Wall, the west wall of the temple. It's one of the sections that survived the destruction, and so it has very significant, historical context. But the Jews, again, revolted. Rome came in and quietened them down, did a lot of bad stuff in 70. There was another siege of Masada in 77. In the year 131 to 135, there was another very significant, almost did wipe out the Jewish nation. Hadrian was the emperor of Rome, and he had issued that they couldn't have Sabbath, they couldn't circumcise their children, but the one that they were most offended by was they were not allowed to teach the Torah out in the public places, and that was about all they could stand, so there was another revolt in. I tell you all that to say the Jewish people would say, at that time, you do battle with Rome, and you won't be there anymore, and they would say, guess what? We did battle with Rome 3 times, and we're still here, and Rome ain't here anymore, all right? It's interesting from their perspective. It is true. The Jewish people are still around, and Rome, they didn't make it. All right, so that happened. So the Jews are dispersed. Again, through all this time, Alexander the Great, the Hasmoneans, the Seleucids, the Romans, doesn't matter, but the land that we would call Israel, the promised land, the land that the Jews believe is rightfully theirs, through all these years, like we said, it's not theirs. They, at times, are able to live there peaceably, some of them. At times, they're not even able to live there, but they're all being scattered throughout all the world during this time. Now, here's another interesting part, is Constantine, y'all know he's the first emperor that Christianity converted to Christianity. I wish I had a lot more time to talk about this. Like most Christians, I think a lot of Christians will tell you this was a wonderful thing. Constantine converted to Christianity, and there was the Edict of Milan, and there was the Nicene Creed. The Nicene Creed basically said because Constantine believes in God and is spiritual, then the whole country has to. I believe this was one of the darkest times for Christianity that has ever been since the time of Jesus Christ, because it took what was supposed to be the way, the followers of Jesus, and it took that all into a very institutional, government-run church, where the government and the church tried to co-lead people, and it was a very ugly thing. For the Jews and their history, it was a terrible thing. And I want to put a marker here. Terrible for them because for hundreds of years, in a lot of scenarios and a lot of situations of which we can't and we won't have the time to go into, people of the world wanted to force Jewish people to accept Christianity. All right? And they would try to convert them. They weren't very successful at that. Then they would try to force them. And I was talking to Christy about this last night, and I had a conversation with a guy at work, and I was wondering, why do people hate the Jews? I mean, I can ask that question bluntly in here. You go through history through so many times. Why do people hate the Jews? What is it about the Jews that are so bad that people hate? And this is really the only thing I can come up with, is they are a group of people that will tell you your Jesus is not Messiah and your God is not their God. And Christian people are typically the ones that have persecuted the Jewish people throughout time. Now, we'll see in a minute, they've come to do battle with Islam. We'll talk about that briefly, but y'all get it? So it's just the way it is. So this, again, was a very bad thing for the Jewish people. Now, they would tell you Jesus was a good guy in some ways. They would tell you that throughout their history, anytime the Jewish people are oppressed or exiled, galat is what it means to be exiled, and numerous times they've been exiled, but anytime their people are exiled, that a lot of times there'll be somebody rise up during that period of time that will claim to be the Messiah, that is trying to help them, try to be helpful, try to do a good thing, and they say that Jesus Christ was one of those that was raised up. He was not the real Messiah, but he came at the time of the Roman oppression. He was raised up and claimed to be the Messiah. He was an okay guy, and he had a few followers, and then they just sort of all disappeared. Paul came along, a guy that never met Jesus, and he tried to get people to follow, and he was so unsuccessful, he finally had to leave the Jewish people and go to what is called the Gentiles, go to the other part of the world and convert people to what he had made up as Christianity, which eventually ends up what Constantine endorsed and became the Catholic Church, and here we are today, all right? I'm just telling you, that is what the story they would tell you about a lot of that, all right? Now, we can't get too much in this, but Constantine in Jerusalem built the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, all right, if you're familiar with that. One of the holiest places. I guess this would be a good time, all right, so he built that. Christianity's growing. Again, that's not real good for the Jews. And then around the 7th century A.D., we're going to move on. Around the 7th century A.D., guess what happens? Muhammad has his calling to Allah, and Islam starts. All right? Muslims, the Arabs converting to this. This happens again in the 7th century, and this is how it spread. That it spread all over the world in a hurry, in a big hurry. Now, we're going to get to Jerusalem in a few minutes. One of the significant things to understand about Jerusalem is, where was the first and the second temple? In Jerusalem on they call it the Temple Mount, all right? In Jerusalem on the Temple Mount. It's also where supposedly David was offering Isaac. It's where Golgotha, and all that. All right, this is the holiest place for Christians. All right, do I know? Guess what else? So this is all now at what's called the Dome of the Rock. Guess what else is at the Dome of the Rock? The mosque for Muhammad. So it's one of their holy. Mecca is another place, but it's one of their holiest places. All right, so you begin to see something. So what we have now is a place that the Muslims, the Arabs, that part of the world views Jerusalem as their capital and their most holy of holy places in the world. And guess what? The Jews view the very same city and the very same plot of land in the city is their capital, and that's their most holy place. Now, how's that going to work out? Yeah, I mean, that works out like the Baptist and Church of Christ being at the buffet at the same time, right? All right, so this just shows you how fast Muslim, that spread into all the world. I might have to skip a few things we can't get. So that's growing, spreading. Again, the Jews at this point have pretty well been dispersed around the world. There's a lot of them that have gone up into Spain. They're up into Lithuania, and they're all over the place. Still a lot down in Babylon and what's in the called the Ottoman Empire, but they're scattered all over the world. Right now, in Jerusalem, the Arab nations have taken over the Islam. All right, and you have between 1100 and about 1300 the Crusades. There's really three main crusades. It's one of the ugliest periods of human history and certainly spiritual history. And I've told you how people can take the Bible and kill people, and that's exactly what happened. Christian people were saying, we need to go back and take this holy land back from them. And so we're going to go down there and we're going to take Jerusalem. And so they go to do these battles. But guess what? Along the way, they run across Jews who won't convert. And so guess what they do to them? They kill them. I mean, they ransack their villages. They do all kind of ugly things. So again, it's just another period of time when the Jewish nation, along with that other, is being persecuted. Very ugly. 3 crusades, bunch of war, and guess what happened? At the end of it, everybody ended up right where they started from. Linda, that's just like the conversation we had about y'all's litigation stuff with your jail dad. You went through a year process to end up. That's exactly what the crusades were. Everybody at the end of the Crusades ended up right where they started from, but they had bunches and bunches of people dead along the way. Then, around the year 1350 came what's known as the Black Plague, the Black Death. It was the spread of the plague in Europe. Y'all remember, you've heard about that, right? I mean, it was ugly. Millions of people died. I think like 1/3 of the world's population, of the European population, died from that. But guess what? The story was told why the Black Plague was out there, because Jews were polluting the wells. Jews were poisoning the wells, and then the poison that people were getting out of the wells was spreading, and that's what was causing people to die. That was one of the stories, not the only thing, but one of the stories told. So guess where you think did that ended up? Yeah, a bunch of the Jewish people being persecuted because of that. Around 1550, there's this big migration of the Jews into various parts of the world, into the Ottoman Empire. And again, I'm just showing you this, how they've spread throughout all the world. Over in Lithuania, in that part of the world where many of them had spread, there's a battle that takes place as Russia comes in and does battle here. And when that happens, there's about 100,000 Jews that lose their life, and the borders of Lithuania and that part of the world, it's all swallowed up into others, and about 900,000 Jews end up in Russia. And they're not welcome in Russia, but that's where they end up. Again, just another period of time, tough for them. If you're thinking, Ray, you're just all over the place. I'm just trying to get you an idea that the Jewish people, right? They're being scattered all over the world for a variety of reasons. This is happening. And over and over and over, wherever they end up, it doesn't work out great for them. for whatever reason, somebody finds a way to be oppressive to them, right? They do end up, a lot of them though in the United States, in the late 1700s, 1800s, or early 1800s, and even in the early 1900s, and that's a pretty good area for them. Again, some in Europe during that time. And 1897 is, so we're getting to what, in 10 minutes we'll finish. 1897, pretty important. This is the first Zionist Congress. Why that is important is the Zionist movement was a movement believing that there should be land that the Jews actually own, if you want to call it that. Just like in the United States, we own the land of the United States, but that the Jewish people should have a land of their own. It was a Zionist movement. Again, this took place, big deal, and a lot happening during that time. Then comes along World War I, and boy, this is where, all right, we're going to wrap this up now. This is where it really gets ugly. All right, you understand all that's taking place. You understand that over where we call Iraq and Afghanistan and all that part of the world, that's been a lot of what was biblical time worlds. But for, since the 7th century, really, much of that part of the world's been controlled by Muslim, Islamic influence. Got that? All right? So World War I comes along, and they're all fighting and they're struggling. And this guy named Balfour, he makes a deal with the Jews. He says, hey, if you will help me out, guess what I'll do? We'll get you the land. We'll get you some land. We'll recognize your part of the world, all right? But along the same time, there was also a commitment made to the Arabs over there that if they could help stop some of the rebellion that was going on, that they'd get some land. And guess what land it was that they're going to get? They're both going to get the same land, all right? Well, that's not going to work out. And so World War I ends up, and it's just sort of an ugly thing. The British are trying to maintain some sense of, peace in this area, but there's just a lot of, as you can say, nobody owns it at this point. There's just commitments out there, and there's some agreements that come along, but nobody really has the land yet. Y'all with me? World War II comes along, and it's even uglier. 6 million or 60 million, I think, wasn't 60 million people that died in World War II or something like that, and I think like 6 million Jews died, many of them as a part of the Holocaust. All right, and that just extremely ugly time. At the end of that war, there was commitment that there would be a state, an Israel state. All right. This shows the UN partition plan of 1947, and you can already see. I'm just wondering, what is it? So, doesn't matter. There's treaties that are put in place. There's agreements that take place. There's a lot of things that happen over a lot of years. For our understanding, here's the biggest thing: is it's complicated, and the same people want the same land. Now, the Jewish people would tell you that they are much more tolerant, that they are willing to live at peace with the Palestinian, what's called the Palestinian people. And by the way, there's never been a Palestine. That's all made up. Palestine was a name given to a people from Russia when they were really making fun of the people that were creating problems for the Jews, because they go back to the Philistines, which were the Jewish people's greatest nemesis when they were trying to take the promised land. That's where Palestine comes from, all right? There's never been a Palestine. It was just a name that's thrown out there and people refer to it now, right? I know a lot of it's complicated, but just get it. There's this part of the world, and there's two people that want it. The Jews would tell you, we will live here at peace if they would live at peace. In fact, there was the Armistice Treaty, I think the one that was signed, and there was an agreement that the Jews would have their part and the Arabs would have their part. And guess what? The Arabs said, no. They said, our part is all of it. The Jews get none of it. And I'm not trying to take sides here. I'm telling you that is still the way it is. The Jews continually try to figure out a part of the land that they can live on, and they feel like they can go to bed at night and have peace. And the Arabs believe the Jews deserve nothing. Period. That's it. I mean, whether you like it or not, whether you agree with that or not, that's just the way it is. So anytime you're sitting down and you're trying to bring these different parties to a table and work out a peace agreement, it doesn't work. And I'm not saying they shouldn't sit and talk and try, but I'm telling you, when we're trying to work out something and we're trying to work out, okay, Catherine, you can have this part, and Greg, you can have that part, and does that sound all right to you? And Greg's view is Catherine gets nothing. Well, Greg, what about just maybe this little section? No, she gets nothing. Okay, can we have some compromise? No, you don't get it, Ray. She gets nothing. All right? And for 100 years, guess what the Arabs have said? The Jews get nothing. All right? And so anything that gives them anything is not acceptable because the Jews get nothing. Now, y'all got that figured out now, right? All right, so there was this partition plan. Then later on in 1949, there was another plan put in place to try to bring about some peace between, then I won't go into all these because we got 5 minutes. I'm going to get to the end. Oh, I got to tell you this one, though. Go back here. So in all this time, they fight a lot. Y'all get that? They've had like the 6-Day War and a bunch of other wars. And y'all remember this was in 1973. There had already been the war with the the Jews had done the 6-Day War. So Israel and Syria, they didn't like that at all because that had happened a few years before. So Egypt and Syria, they go do battle with the Jewish people. And it is, by this point, it is Israel. It is a recognized nation or nationality of people, and there's certain land they're supposed to have. But they're still battling over borders all the time, fighting over them. So they go and they try to take back what Israel had taken from them a few years before. And they're successful a little bit at first. Then the United States gets involved, sending them a bunch of supplies, helping them out, and all that kind of stuff. And guess what they did? They said, all right, that's what you're going to do. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to raise oil prices 70% and cut oil production 5%. See how you like that, United States. And that's where we ended up in 1973 in the first gas crisis was because of what was taking place over in that part of the world. And guess what? In 1980, there's more fighting. Well, this is important. In November 15th of 1988, the PLO, the Palestinian Labor Organization, but a recognized Palestinian party recognized Palestine as a country, and 136 other countries agreed with that and recognized that. So now you've got all this land over there, and you got all these people fighting. And I want to get to this, all right? And they can't get along. I'd love to spend a lot more time with you here, but I want this, whether you hear it on the news accurately or not, this is factual, all right? There's a place over there called the Gaza Strip, and it's been battled over, and that's when you turn on your TV right now, that's what we're talking about is this part of the world, right? Been doing battle over that part of the world for a long, long time. There was a time when Israel occupied the Gaza Strip. And there's been times when Israel and Palestinians, as they would call them today, we'll refer to them that because that's what they call them, would occupy together. In 2005, the prime minister, I think is what they call him in Israel, but they pulled out of Gaza. They gave Gaza to the Arab people. Now, Israel still controls the boundaries of what is Gaza, but they don't occupy Gaza any longer. Right? They gave it to them, and all they asked was you stay in there and you mind your own business, right? But Hamas, who is like ISIS, Hamas is, whether you want to believe it or not, it is a terrorist organization. It rules Gaza, all right? And so what you saw a little over a week ago, a couple of weeks ago now, was, now always they're throwing rockets at each other. All right, that's just sort of the life over there. Greg, I know some of y'all been over there, but that's sort of the life over there, right? Most of the time, they're really not trying to hurt anybody. It's just they're just making sure the other one knows that we're here, all right? And we might want to hurt you, and if we really do, we will, which is what Hamas did. They said, all right, we're going to hurt you, all right? And they did. They shot rockets into Israel, and it was ugly. Now, the other thing we need to get before we shut up is whether you agree with it or not, doesn't matter. Israel is not like the United States, right? Like, we saw some conflict over in the Middle East, and we ended up over there 20 years, okay? Because some people did some things we didn't like on September 11th, so we ended up there for 20 years or what. Y'all know what I mean? That's sort of how we respond to stuff, sort of like back in Vietnam or wherever those times are. Israel is almost like Rome, all right? You mess with us, we'll wipe you off the face of the earth to where you are never a threat to us again. Now, I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm saying that's what Israel's response is today. Why that is so significant, and I think why a lot of you are here and we care, is depending on how Israel's response goes toward Hamas, which will be supported and backed up by Iran, which will be supported and backed up by North Korea and the Russians, all right, determines how much the United States and their allies support Israel. And I'm not here to try to scare anybody, but this conflict could be over in a couple of weeks, and we could have all-out major World War III in a couple of weeks. It's just that explosive, what is taking place over there. I hope you appreciate the discussion and just a little awareness of the people and what's going on. I close with asking us, we need to be prayerful, all right? God, this is Ray Palmer's opinion, God is not, quote, pulling for either side. God is pulling for all of his humanity to find peace with him and peace with each other. I do not believe that the Jewish people or the nation of Israel is a favored people any more than the people of Iran or Hamas. Now, I might agree or disagree with some of the tactics used by either side and like one or the other better. Y'all get that, right? But let's be careful that if we are faithful to God today, we understand God loves everybody, and we're to love everybody, and we're to pull for everybody to be successful. Y'all get that? Pull for everybody to find peace. It's not for us to take sides. It is for us to have a decent understanding of what's in the world. And I hope anyway, 7:31, I said I'd shut up. Yes, ma'am.
Nancy Acuff asked that we have prayer for them tonight. She and Phil have COVID, and the baby tested positive today. He's very sick.
Okay. Phil and Nancy Acuff, they both have COVID, and y'all know they do foster care for special needs children, and the one that they have in foster care has COVID now. So let's pray. Father, thank you for our time together. Hopefully, Father, we've just been a little enlightened on that part of the world, the people, the Jewish people, just some of their thoughts, ideas, what they believe. And Father, we pray for peace. We hurt for all families that are hurting in Gaza, Israel, extended families throughout all the world. Again, we just pray that some way your love will have an impact and people will seek your will. Several people among our family that are hurting, struggling, going through difficult times, and Father, we ask that you give them strength, give them hope, give them courage. Especially right now, I just ask special prayer of blessing on Phil and Nancy. They do such wonderful work in their fostering, and we ask the special healing on the baby they have now. And Father, help us all to encourage them as we encourage each other. Through Jesus we pray. Amen. Thanks.